Screen. Right, so we are going over a presentation on, hopefully you guys can see that, on masters athletes, more so like considerations. Can everyone see that? Yeah. More so like what considerations can we make for when we have a masters athlete that comes on board. Now, these are my, I don't wanna sort of go in on it, but I love coaching masters athletes. They're so unique in the fact of like just the personality type that they have, and just who they are as a person is a completely different ball game to having a younger person on board. And I only hope that from this people can have a maybe even a slightly wider understanding of like what it takes to coach a masters athlete, but then just the benefits that you'll get from it as a coach, as well as a person, and everything else. I am just gonna get my notes up as well, because otherwise I will lose myself in thought, and we don't want that. Right, so going over our sort of like objectives of today, I kind of already said some of that, but it's to know how we're going to develop a coaching framework for when someone comes on board. Now, again, this isn't to go over or teach you guys how to do your own coaching. We all know how to coach. We all know how to program. It's more about developing the thought process that might go behind it. Understand like the similarities and then the nuances or differences. Coaching a junior, sub-junior, or even an open athlete compared to coaching a masters athlete, and we'll define what an actual masters athlete is in a later slide. And then off the back of that is just like improving or having a wider understanding of what we can do via programming decisions, the type of communication that we have with them, and then just like how we can keep their development running, because again, how they develop and how they succeed as an athlete is a little bit different. So we need to make sure that we know what we're doing so that they can succeed as an athlete. Right, going over, sorry, technology. So defining a masters athlete. Now, a lot of people tend to think that a masters athlete is someone who's old or someone who is 40 plus years, and it's really not the case. There's a lot of things that sort of go into what defines a masters athlete. I've included a couple of things here on the slide. So we got chronological age and biological age. So chronological age is like how old you are on the calendar. So if it was me, I'm 29, I'm broken already. But like if you take a 50-year-old, for example, but then you have biological age. Now this is different from this is so unique to everyone. Like it defines the type of lifestyle that you might have lived. I'm going to say inside the gym or outside the gym. Like you will get some people who are maybe 45 years old and they actually move and they feel like they're 30. And then you could get someone who's like, I don't know, 35 years old, and they might be on the other end of the scale, again, depending on lifestyle choices that they have made, even work commitments and everything else. So again, this is something that we really have to consider when we are onboarding someone, is don't just look at their age as, oh, they're going to be very frail, or oh, we need to not give them as much volume as someone else, or something like that. We need to make sure that we're taking everything into consideration. To this is like movement options. So like how much movement do they have? Recoverability. I hate saying that word, but like obviously there's training history back here as well. But like how much can they, what is their sporting background? Do they have a sporting background? Again, that goes into the biological element. Tissue tolerance, like how much can they just tolerate? How much stimulus can these individuals tolerate when they come through the door? And this kind of takes us into like the training history element. So some people, again, will walk through the door and they might have years of sport behind them. Again, we got to think they've been on this planet for 20, 30, 40 plus years. They will have a background of either sport or or maybe not any sport. They might not have any training history as well, but that also integrates with what we're going to be saying. Physical work, so it doesn't even have to be within the gym. Like, are they a laborer? Are they a plasterer? Are they a bricklayer? Like, again, these are lots of considerations that we have to consider, because that is load, like that is a stimulus. Again, a lot of things people don't consider is what they do outside of the gym or outside of sport. If you've got yourself someone who is a laborer and done it for 20 years, you got to think of the positions they've put themselves in within those 20 years, the loads that they've been carrying. Are they distributing that load onto one side of the body? Again, all considerations that we have to take. And then work and lifestyle demands. Are they a parent? Are they a grandparent? Um, are they working a 9 to 5? Are they self-employed with very weird shift patterns? Again, I'm going to compare it to, like, you got your slightly younger person. They've got different life stresses, again, that we need to take consideration of. The gym or training or powerlifting probably isn't going to be the be all and end all. It has to complement their lifestyle outside of the gym, and then we have to accept those potential limitations that they bring to the table. Kids aren't limitations, but you know what you know what I mean. And then, do they have any injuries? Either old injuries that they may have sustained, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, but could still affect general day-to-day movement. Or do they have any new-ish type of injuries that we have to consider? Again, very much like whenever we onboard anyone new, the only consideration is the time that they would have had said injury, or their body has compensated for said injury. If they've done something to their ankle 10 years ago, and they haven't really seen to it, and they're shifting onto their right side as a byproduct, then that's definitely a consideration that we have to make when we are programming for them. So yeah, orthopedics as well, or surgical orthopedics. That's another thing that we will cover briefly. But have they had any surgery before? Like, do they have a metal hip that we have to be aware of or conscious of? Again, that changes the programming or the decision making that we implement onto said individuals. Oh, very long-winded. I do apologize. So, going into like the first major consideration, I've touched upon most of these points just then, is like the background of said individual. And I compare them to a younger athlete because I view it as two things. I view a younger athlete, again, junior, sub-junior, and maybe sometimes an open athlete. They are a blank canvas. Like, they haven't had any paint splashed on them yet. We can nurture and we can develop their motor skills, their learning, their positional awareness. We can develop them. And to some extent, that is quite easy to nurture, in the sense of we can give direction, they have to follow direction, build motor skills on that, and so forth. It's almost the opposite when it comes to masters athletes per se. Again, they've been on this planet 20, 30, 40 plus years on top of a junior. Movement patterns would have been ingrained. Now, I don't just mean movement patterns within the gym, but just outside in general, like how you sit up and down from a chair, how you walk day to day, what your gait looks like. What is the coordination like? They've already developed these skills. So our job when we are coming into the coaching process is not treating them as a blank canvas, but a canvas has already been painted, and we have to try and modify that over a extensive period of time. Like, for the most part, their bodies will often resist positional change. Like, I see it all the time. You try and implement something, and their body, like, they understand the concept, but their body's like, I don't like that. I haven't moved like that before. I'm not doing that. And this is where, again, the program considerations come in, which we will talk about. in a little bit. Um, it also does mean that training might, or if we've got someone coming in, let's say they've got a little bit of training background behind them, it might mean that there's going to be a little bit of regression right at the start to make these technical changes. And we need to accept that. Like, we need to accept that there might be a little regression if the whatever we are trying to implement is the right decision based on off of us. But there might be a little regression for long-term success. Now, again, we all talk about this, and like, that is good practice for coaching, is we need to consider what is the long-term benefits for said athletes. It's just a case of it will probably take a little bit longer to implement these changes for a mass lifter compared to someone who is ever so slightly younger. Now, this does take me on to point number 2, or consideration number 2, I should say. Now, this is the needs analysis. Now, we probably all got some form of framework that we follow, and it probably follows something like this. I've just tried to contextualize it or have a little bit of a visual. And again, I'm not going to go over the specific coaching elements because there's so many avenues that we can make. But if we are looking at a masters athlete, again, we're not trying to think of age as a limiter. Age is not a limiter. Okay, so if we go over the needs analysis, we're looking at the limiter. So what is limiting an athlete to adapt? What are their constraints? Oh, go away. What are their constraints? So the interventions that dictate a choice, i.e. the amount of sleep someone can get, will depend on how much volume we might give a person for recoverability purposes, as an example. And then how much time do we have for those adaptations to be made? Again, a lot of people see age as the limiter, but it's really not, based on what we said before. That is more of a constraint. Yes, okay, based on their age, they might be a little bit more susceptible to achy joints. Their soft tissues might be a little bit more weaker, or they might sustain a little bit more fatigue compared to someone who's a little bit younger. But when we are looking at these factors, obviously, when we are profiling our athletes, this is the kind of outline that we need to be looking at. If I can zoom in here, hopefully you can all see that. So when we're looking at a limit, so when we got an athlete in front of us and we go, right, okay, we want to improve your X, Y, and Z. What is the primary limiter that's restricting us from performing? Muscle size, work capacity, expression of strength or expression of skill, or the coordination that person has. Fatigue, masking ability, pain or tissue tolerance that they might have, and do they have any confidence or fear under load issues? Again, that is a limiter that we can program or task the athlete with trying to overcome. The constraints someone might have, what limits our intervention of choices? So recovery. So again, if we've got a masters athlete, their sleep patterns might be a little bit all over the place. Like if they're running their own business, Callum can probably attest this. Not saying that he's a master athlete, but like how much sleep are they getting on a regular basis? You know, I'm right. Orthopedic history. So again, have they had any surgical intervention? So do they have a metal hip? That might restrict the amount of range of motion that they have in the hip. And is it comfortable for them to like tolerate a certain amount of load or volume? And then you got your lifestyle. And is their lifestyle consistent? Like, do you have I'm going to say like a 9-to-5 job? You got 2 kids, but it's on a scheduled routine. The kids are at a comprehensive school. You have a set window that you can train within. Any movement constraints? So again, if we are thinking of a masters athlete, like range of motion, Do they have any limited range of motions, or is their range of motion okay? Ingrained movement patterns, again, spoke about this before. They've been on this planet for ages. They will probably have a likely bias towards certain movement patterns, and other movement patterns their body will not like in the slightest. And then psychological tolerances as well. For some people, like load, for example, that might be a limitation. They might fear a particular amount of load that they have to lift. If they're a newer person, they might go, oh, well, I feel like just the way that they perceive themselves, I feel a bit frail. I don't want to be lifting X. Something that we can work with. It's not really a limitation, but something that we can work with is a constraint of some degree. And then when it comes to time, it is literally just a case of like, how long does this adaptation take? How long do we have? I.e., do we have a competition coming up, or do we have a year to mold the person in front of us? And then how quickly can we change the limiter? I.e., is there one thing that we can work on? Building muscle mass, building more resilient soft tissues. If we do a really good job of that within 6 months, what is the next thing within our list that we could tackle? Go away. Oh no, it's not shrinking. There it is. So that takes us on to specificity. Now again, this is one slide of two. Let me get my notes up. So specificity, I hate saying that word, isn't just about like the squat, the bench, the deadlift, a 1 rep max. It is it's a misunderstood concept in my opinion. It's relevant stress. So for a masters athlete, for example, like we have to consider other things as well as just a 1 rep max. So specificity, quality, what qualities are we trying to target? The limiter within their movement. What positions or what range of motion did they have access to? Fatigue cost of the work that we are giving them. The skill demand or the coordination required of said movement. Do they have the skill? Do they have the coordination to do said skill? And then the psychological demands. Now, when it comes to specificity and programming, these are the considerations that I tend to make when I am programming or looking or discussing with, again, one of these people that's in front of me. And again, this isn't a rule, this isn't a set rule, but more of a guideline, something that I followed quite successfully, I'd like to say. What can we do to preserve exposure to competition patterns? Can we reduce any unnecessary fatigue accumulation within their training? I.e., like, do we have to be very, very simple with what we prescribe to this person, depending on, again, their lifestyle outside the gym, their recoverability and everything else? At what point can we avoid technique collapse? So again, this is another consideration for how much intensity I give them, the amount of volume that I give them, the frequency, and also the spacing within a week or 2 weeks in terms of exposures. And then can I use variations to maintain competition practice without inducing irritation? Again, if someone comes in and they've got an irritation of some degree and we can't do a back squat, for example, like let's say their shoulders are a bit naff, something that we can work on, but for the immediate action, well, we can't do a back squat, but we can do an SSB. Like we can subscribe something that is to some extent competition specific. And then the difference between like a younger athlete and a masters, to some extent, of course, a younger lifter can tolerate an accumulation of either volume intensity within a shorter space of time, to drive stimulus or to drive growth, drive adaptation, compared to a master's. Whereas I tend to find like a master's, they need a longer period of time to make progress. I tend to find their programming is just a little bit more steady. It's a little bit more tame for the most part, of course, again, but they do tend to thrive on like what I said there, like repeatable exposures that they can recover from, but still make good grounds, good progress, good momentum from week to week, block to block. And again, this takes me on to the programming and adjustment. Now, when we are looking at all of these markers that we can adjust when we're programming, again, I'm not going to go through all of it. We should all know the concepts of this, but I view these as dials. Like we got volume, we got intensity, frequency, stress distribution, and that could be either like accessories where they distribute stimulus or stress on a particular muscle group, for example, or you got your big three. Your exercise selection or variations, range of motion, and positional demands. Now, when we are programming for anyone, what we are doing, we are playing with these dials to drive adaptation in some way, shape, or form. We've all got our processes. From my experience, and again, I am talking from my experience, and from I have discussed this with a couple of people as well. And the overarching sort of consensus is quality for 9 times out of 10 outweighs quantity. So the amount of good quality work that we can do will outweigh the amount of additional circumstances that you can add, i.e. there's no point in adding a shit ton of volume, intensity, or anything else if the athlete is thriving from a technical point of view, and a recoverability point of view. So the first initial goal that I always tend to set, again, typically, is developing skill and confidence under load. So again, these people walk in, depending on what their job might have been, or depending on their lifestyle, depending on if they've played any other sports. First and foremost is development of their movement patterns, their skill, their technique. That will allow us to express the best possible outcome at a later date. It's number one for me. I try to keep competition patterns present. I don't try to mix it up too much unless necessary. Now, again, there's some debate around that, but I do like to go basic in terms of like, right, okay, if we can work within squat, bench, and deadlift, and maybe add a tempo or something like that to keep very relevant skill without overloading the person, I like to go down that route. I don't like to add too many variations or variables within the mix. Personal preference on there, and I do have another slide that'll go over some of that as well. And then when it comes to a programming standpoint, fewer harder sets. So again, I'm trying to keep a consistent baseline that we can work with and establish, and we know that we can recover from, and also progress as time goes on. More submaximal exposures. So again, if we think of the sport of powerlifting, it is a skill or expression based sport. We need to make sure that we're doing the basics, especially if we're going in to compete. I like to make sure that I might include some more submax exposures. That could look like anything. Typically lower rep ranges. For the most part, there's some cognitive thinking that goes into this as well. Again, we can nurture a younger athletes, but an older athletes, they'll probably be thinking about it more. I don't want them overthinking mid-set. So I try to deviate down ever so slightly, lower rep ranges, so that we can keep the focus on the sets at hand. Which allows us to keep repeatability from week to week as well. What a handsome young fellow, and what a So considerations, variations. Now, again, I did say that I try to stay away from variations, but like anything, like all other programming, they must play a part or a consideration when we are programming. More often than not, again, there's likely an old injury or something crops up, and we need to make sure that we keep things specific, or we have a good idea as to what we can implement that's not going to confuse the athletes. Like if you give someone, I don't know, if they are a squatter and then you give them, I don't know, front squat as an example, like they will have no benefit to that for the most part, because it's just a completely different movement criteria. The demands of a front squat probably defeats the needs of what they need out of that variation. Again, we might go into an SSB. It's easier, it's on the back, they can still follow the same cues or patterns that you've given them or established already. So yeah, when it comes to variations, specific to the competition lifts as best as possible, we can implement them to reduce joint or tissue irritations. Now, again, sometimes these just crop up, very much like my knee. Like these things can just crop up from time to time, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there is a massive ongoing issue, but we do need to be very much aware that these can catch up to these massive lifters quite fast. So we need to be aware of the type of communication, the type of pain points that they are communicating to us, and not ignoring them or not going, well, it's just one of those things. No, we need to be on it. We might not need to make a change, but we need to be very much aware of, this is where the volume is, this is where the intensity is. Do I need to make any changes to those, or do I need to add in a variation that distributes the stress in a different way? Oh yeah, shift stimulus location, excellent. Manage fatigue cost and build confidence with repeatable, successful reps. The other thing as well that I'll add into variation, and again, this is kind of stemming away from the big three, is for some people, I'll give you an example. Vernon here, lovely chap. He's 6 foot odd, 82 years old. He can only tolerate, for his mechanics and his build, he can only tolerate a certain amount of squatting. But he's a workhorse. Like he's got an extensive amount of training history behind him, and he can do some good hard work. But we can't have him do tons and tons and tons of squats, because it just puts him in a mechanical disadvantage based on his leverages. So we then lever into like things like a leg press, for example, just to get lower body stimulus. So in particular scenarios where you have worked with an athlete before, or you know what the limitations are, we can then work around it, so long as it's specific to the athlete at hand. And again, we don't want to add in just random variations. I know none of you would do that anyway, but if anyone else is watching, we don't want to guess what we're giving our athletes. We want to make sure that a variation is chosen based on a limiter that the athlete has expressed. Make sure that it is within the realms of the constraints that they've given us. And we got to make sure that we have enough time so that that variation sticks and allows the athlete to adapt. God, I've never spoken so much in my life. I bet you guys love this. Right. Now, I'm not going to speak too much on this, because I do work closely, and I know some of you do as well. I do work closely with a physiotherapist on hand. I work very closely with, in terms of like movement variabilities and things. So whenever I do get a masters athlete, I, to some extent, have them go through a process of a movement screening test with me, but potentially with them as well if I deem it necessary. Now, the reason why I do this is a physio or a movement specialist can help me decide on how much range do they have within a joint, how much movement do they have, and then how much do they think, as well as I do, how much their tissues can potentially tolerate as they move. I'm getting out now. And then it makes me more aware as to how much dosage of anything that I give them. But this does refer back to the pain and tissue tolerance of, again, these masters athletes. So a couple of things that we need to be aware of, or some things that we need to definitely consider when we are programming them, or looking for things that we might need to change as we are going through the process. Have we dosed anything too high? So volume is probably number one. Like, have we given them too much volume to the point where they can't handle, or something has been irritated in some way? The range of motion that we are asking of them to do. So again, I go back to the hip or the knee. If a competition squat, a full range competition squat, if they can't consistently hit depth, let's say if they're squatting 2 times a week, but making them squat to full range or full depth, I should say, is this too demanding on their joints for them to recover from? So again, an intervention there might be a case of, well, we know that we might be able to get away with doing it 1 time a week. What intervention can I do for that second exposure? Could we do a form of a box squat? Could we do a form of a tempo squat, maybe to parallel or something just a little bit higher, again, keeping specificity there? Or do we need to look further down the chain? Again, in terms of the amount of fatigue that they can build, if we're not closely monitoring how much or the type of communication that they're giving us, fatigue can be built rapidly. And again, this is why I like more of a constant trend of training rather than like, if we're looking at intensity, RP6s waving up to an RP9, dropping back down. I very rarely do that, because the accumulation that they get, that they build from that, and then maintain as well. It's not just a case of what are they feeling at the end of one block. Like, they can retain fatigue and they can mask it quite well. So again, it's just something that we have to consider. And then exposures. So what are the exposure windows like? And again, I spoke about this before, in terms of, if we underexpose them because we've gone down the rabbit hole, well, less is more. They're gonna feel like detrained. And again, this is normal coaching practice. If they don't have as much frequent exposure that they need, they will feel detrained, and they like that can also bring about a form of, or potential form of, pain later down the road. So again, it's just making sure that we are giving them the right amount of exposure so that they are building tolerance for the specific movements that we're giving them. We're just making sure that the exposures that we are giving them are all sustainable. Now, the last thing that I want to go over, or one of the last things I want to go over anyway, there's going to be some things that questions might pop up and I'll be happy to answer, is communication. Now, I'm going to go off of a bit of a tangent with this one. Masters athletes are now, chronological age I'm talking about now, they are a little bit different when it comes to communication compared to the younger generation. They respond to clear, concise, consistent, contextual, calm, and predictable type of communication. What does all this mean? It just means you need to be on your shit when you are replying to these people. You need to make sure that you are not what's the word? You're not over exaggerating anything. You have a calm demeanor about you, and you also need to make sure that you have that they appreciate, I should say, they appreciate predictable windows of communication. So I've got a couple of guys, and they have it's actually quite funny, but they have certain times of day that they will message, and there are certain times of day that they will give you their videos, their information, their texts, or whatever it might be. Off of the back of that, they don't require much. Like, they don't require you to really hype them up or anything like that. But they very much want clear instructions. Like, what do you mean? Don't bullshit anything. Clear, precise instructions of what you need of them. Don't be about the bush for them. Concise instructions, again, goes into that. They want consistency of the programming that you're giving them, the times that you're programming them, the consistency of the feedback that you're giving them, the feedback loop. We need to make sure that when it comes to contextual, we need to make sure that we are to the point. Again, how many of us have messaged someone who's ever so slightly older and they just reply with a thumbs up? Like, they are punctual, and for the most part, from what I've seen and from the people that I've spoken to as well, that's the type of feedback that they respond best to. When it comes to calm, again, it's just making sure that we're not overhyping a situation. They're not the neurotic type of lifters that we do see in the slightly younger generation. And then when it comes to actually giving feedback or running through a block review or things like that, there's loads of ways that you can go about this. The ways that I try to avoid as best as I can, the best that I can, is actually voice notes. Now, I am a big fan of voice notes. I love voice notes, but I do tend to find, and this could just be a me thing, likely a me thing, but they do tend to miss the point of any form of explanation that I give them, because one, there's no clear visual representation of what I'm asking them to do, and two, with a voice note as well, it's not clear, it's not concise, especially when it comes from me. I can ramble on a little bit. You guys are all aware of that. So we need to make sure that, again, we're doing everything that we can so that it's consistent for said athlete in front of us. Loom videos has been one of the greatest things that I've done for my masters athletes, to understand the layout of the program, what we're doing, why we're doing it on a week-to-week basis. It's just reminding them, and it's just going through key bits. And they always have questions about everything, and that's superb. That's amazing. It develops their understanding of what we're trying to achieve. Phone calls is another one. So I try to get on the phone call kind of like at the end of every block if I can't get on a Zoom call. And again, it's just having a nice, clear conversation with said person. Like, they love a conversation, and for them, it goes a long way. It really does go a long way. And videos, like video responses, because again, they are very, there is another word for it and I can't think of it, but visual learners. Like, if you're asking them to hinge, again, you've got to think, if you've got a builder who has been bending down picking up a sandbag or picking up a bag of cement, like, his version of a hinge is very different to our version of a hinge, and it will take him a lot of goes, or a lot of trial and error, and a lot of visual representation of what we are trying to achieve from that person. If we just text them, stick your hips back, for example, that's not going to go anywhere. So again, it's just prioritizing what they will best respond to, and what I have found the greatest success with. And then I'm just going to go into my collective thoughts, and then I'd love some questions, because again, there's probably a lot of bits that I have missed, but would love just to have a deep dive conversation on. The one thing that I love about masters athletes is the meaningful relationships that I have built with said athletes. Now, if we're looking at retention, yes, they are probably some of the long-standing people that I have, but that is based on a level of I've put it there, a level of respect, or a level of mutual understanding from both parties. Again, I've spoken to some guys on this aspect. They are very much respectful of my time, of my other commitments, my my lifestyle outside of the gym and coaching. With the same respect, I'm very respectful of what they do, and like everything in between. I've probably had the most valuable or best interactions with these people because they care about the process probably more than anyone else. They're in this process, yes, to achieve something. It could be to go to Worlds, it could be to go to nationals, whatever it is on a platform, but they're doing this for themselves. They know what they want, and they know that you are there to help them. And that relationship, I can't explain it. I cannot explain it, but it is such an amazing process that you'll go through. It's one of those processes where there's a lot of thought process that has to go behind it for the programming, for everything that goes into it, but it makes it all the more worthwhile. So if you're on the fence about coaching someone who is within the realm of a masters athlete, I would very much recommend it. It's like coaching anyone else. It's not too indifferent. There's just more thought process that has to go into what limiters do they have, what are they presenting to you, what do you need to work around, and how patient can you be with the program rather than making irrational choices. And how can you then communicate that to the athletes who are 9 times out of 10 very understanding the position they're in. To that extent, I'll end it there. So that's a lot of talking. I got a sweat on. I hope you enjoyed that to some degree. But yeah, any questions?
I do actually. I do have a question. So you mentioned about communications being like calm, clear, and concise,
Yes.
obviously throughout the course of your coaching with them.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find that your communications with a masters athlete on the day, like on platform, where it is a bit higher energy, it is a bit higher stress? How do you find that those compare to, example, for a younger lifter, or how do those differ than a younger lifter on the day?
So I think this does speak more for my demeanor more than anything else. I try to have such a calm presence on the day, especially with someone who is a little bit older. Again, like a competition environment can be a bit neurotic. So if my approach 9 times out of 10 is just making sure that they're not overthinking. I tend to find that's the overarching issue, that they can or do overthink anything and everything. So it's just making sure that they have a system of very, very, very simple cues that we know that if I say the word, can I add to this? Yes. If I say the word, they go, right, okay, I know what headspace I need to be in. But I do think like just having a calm demeanor for the most part tends to allow them to keep themselves on a level of calmness, if that's what you want to call it. Go.
So there's something you touched on, which I think is really important to almost every point we're going to discuss, which is like there's a very big difference between a 50 or 60-year-old who is introduced to powerlifting and a 50 or 60-year-old who has been doing powerlifting for 20 years. And that applies to like everything from when we're talking about volume or limitations and so on. But the same thing goes for comp day. So one of my favorite anecdotal athletes for this would be Alexia, because when she started training with me, she was at competitions and exactly how you described her. So, like very anxious, very concerned, very much overthinking, very much have to calm her down. Now we just have fun. And like, but that is another 5 years in competition. She'd done another 5 years before that, who knows? But those things, a lot of those parameters do change over time. And I do think, like I've made a ton of notes. There's loads of this I'd love to talk about more, but yeah, there's such a huge variation in how you want to communicate with someone or how they are on the day if they've done the sport for 10 years. So some people have done it on 10 years. They're like, let's fucking go. I'm all for this. They love it. There's people being like, this is kind of intense. This is a bit scary because they've never done a competition. And it's such a different social realm when if you're retired, I sure as shit don't think your like local bowls club has the same experience as competition day. But at the same time, if you've been doing powerlifting for 10 years, this is your shit. You spend most of your social time in the gym. So yeah, you touched on, I think it's like such an important point of being like, there are people who you will coach who have done the sport longer than you've been in the sport at all. Like they've been here since we've started and have gone again. Can I add one thing to that? Like I have loads of notes, but one more thing I wanted to add. Something you mentioned, which is so important, right? Is like stuck in your ways. This is something that's actually like so fundamentally important. If someone's been in the sport for 20 years, how we coach, which is birthed from the idea of things like emerging strategies, right? That didn't exist. And so how we coach now is not just foreign, but it is wrong to some people's training with principles. So they would have come from things that were conjugate. They'll be used to things that are box squats, maybe chain work, band work, speed days. And so in principle, trying to shift to what we're doing is so alien that there is one fundamental that floats really well, that suits a master's lifter unbelievably well, which is RPE. So there is significantly more factors, as Ryan describes, and also we didn't stop to say, fucking brilliantly done, Ryan, very good presentation. But to add to that, there are so many more variables that can happen, right? You might have kids, you might have external stresses. Highest injury in the UK is usually down to parents picking up their children out of the bath, and so there's so many things that are more prevalent within those age groups. And so RPE is probably the fundamental best tool I consider in programming, but it is the most useful tool to someone who is a master's lifter, because there's so many other things that happen, especially as you get into later age groups, and these things vary drastically from 40 to 50 to 60 to 70. Just want to add that bit, sorry.
Anyone else?
How would you approach someone who's like had hip or knee replacement and they like struggle to hit squat depth? Like how would you approach coaching that or programming around it?
So again, I know my limitations. Now, this isn't to say like this is my first protocol, but I will likely seek some outside help. I'm very fortunate that where I work and everything else, I do have a physiotherapist on hand. Movement specialist is what I call her, because she's fantastic. If ever I have someone of that come to me, what is the limitation? The limitation is obviously their hips. They can't hit depth. Okay, what is the criteria that they're trying to get out of their training from the get-go, from immediate? Is it to hit depth, or is it just to get into the world of powerlifting? If it's just to get into the world of powerlifting, I'm not concerned on how much depth that they can hit for like right at the beginning. So where I will be working alongside the physio, or if it's a quite simple case, I will try to work on their mechanics in some way. Like are they limited via mobility or the amount of range that they can access, or are they limited by the amount of stability that they have at the joints? Like we can almost make that differentiation quite easily. It's thereafter where I get a bit like, oh, that's a bit more complex. But it's dissecting what is the needs of this athlete that's come to me. They want to compete in a year. Excellent. Depth comes at a slightly later date, in my opinion, for competition specific depth. Like what interventions can I make so that we can get to that point? What can I add in right at the beginning so that we can get them under a bar, first and foremost? So again, we might look at things like tempo squats to a range that is tolerable for them for a prolonged period of time. If they aren't aware of how much space that they can get into, or aware of space in general, let's add a box for a short term. Let's get them aware of how far they can actually go, and then we can work based off of that. Hopefully that answers that question in some manner.
So some stuff I want to add to that, because this is such a good topic. I'm going to try to also not ramble, because anyone who's worked within rehab, right? So there's active and passive range of motion testing. So anything active range of motion is exactly as Ryan said, like address it with increased movement over time, because that's things that you can access. It's just mechanical struggle, right? Someone not understanding positioning. Passive range of motion testing, if there's like an actual block in position, at that point, then it is like stance change, trying to find something you can actively work around it, because that's not going to be attained probably. There's something really interesting with, because you said about hip and knee replacements. This isn't something that's in studies, but I think it's really interesting. So does anyone know the time frame, if you get a knee replacement, how long it takes typically until you need another one?
Oh shit. was talking about this the other day.
So to not leave it hanging, it's about 10 years, right?
Mm.
One of the reasons this is actually really interesting, if you have, let's say, a masters lifter who's 60, if they're potentially in need of a knee replacement, if you make that happen quicker, that will last till 70. When you are north of around 65, NHS doesn't care, you will not get a replacement. You actually have to make really significant life considerations. This only comes to point because there's a lifter I know of who is having a knee replacement, and I think there should be significantly more considerations to what that does to the rest of their life, because it's going to happen earlier now, which means they will not get a second one. And so typically with certain age groups, you actually want to prolong that opportunity to get the replacement. So trying to sustain training for longer, take it much slower, allow the fact that that's going to slow down the rate of progress, but let the knee replacement happen at a later date so that it's sustained into the rest of their life. I think that's one of the most interesting things that people do not spend time with. Sometimes if you're like 40, get the fucking op because you'll get another one at 50. If you're in your 50s, you probably want to consider the fact you might not get another one. I think it's just important.
Can I just briefly say how crazy it is that like that is the very core principle of you coach a person, like an individual first, and then you coach an athlete. In other words, you deal with a person and then an athlete.
Yeah.
Because the amount of times that like that's information that quite frankly, like most people, I mean, how many of us knew it? Like Callum knew it off the top of his head and Ryan had had the discussion, but the rest of us didn't know that. And that's a really important life consideration for people to be making.
I had one of the things I was going to ask you, Ryan. This is probably just a straight discussion, right? So, anecdotally, again, I'm thinking Alexia and a few other masters lifters that I've worked with. You've definitely worked with significantly more than I have. I found that, like, when you're going through peaking phases, it's nigh on treating it like a 120 plus lifter in the sense of being like, you can run through those, which is a weird metaphor, right? But I think that actually does work relatively well.
Yeah.
You still have those exposures, but they run at lower intensities. The recovery rate is slower, and so you have them less frequent. So let's say a block's let's just say every block finishes on a single. That single potentially runs 6.5 through 7. Maybe it touches an 8. In the peaking block, maybe it's an 8.5. But again, it doesn't run as high an intensity in any of the phases as I've seen.
Yeah, for like 9 times out of 10 for the most part, where I have experimented with that for more of the experienced lifters. Andy's one of them. Like, he's an experienced lifter. He's got gym training behind him before powerlifting. We actually ran this, and we ran something more intense. He couldn't recover from it. Could not recover from it. Like, in theory, on paper, yeah, absolutely. But on the platform, he just fell flat. He's just like, I don't feel great at the moment. So like a lot of the time I do run them a little bit softer, as you've just said. A little bit more sustainable is kind of like how I would put it. And to that extent, a little bit more predictable. Again, we are training them like any other athlete. It's just trying to find where that point of back end expression comes out. Like, how much intensity does this person need? How much volume does this person need? It's all about trying to manage all these expectations, and then how much can we spread it? Like, rather than having very short spouts, like, no, we need to spread this out a little bit longer. And I do tend to find like I can run slightly longer blocks of them. I don't know if you've come across that.
I was going to say the same thing. So I was looking at some of the studies that are actually behind this, right? And one of the issues is there's huge amounts of study, and everyone should know this, that like if you're past the age of 40, you should be doing some sort of weight training, some format, reduces sarcopenia and osteoporosis and tons of other stuff. But trained population in those age ranges, like what recoverable volume is, and also how to progress it. So like you can run through any phases of training and improve the relative intensity or the total volume being run. But actually within that demographic, I would find it really hard. I do. But actually I think it's created some of the best programming I've ever done, but it comes off the back of like finding significant difficulty in finding means of progression over time. Because it's not the linear progression, it's not block on block progression. But I do find that block length is actually my easiest scope.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's something that I'm becoming more and more aware of as I'm going through, as I'm programming all these people, and not just like for top end performance, but for like how they feel day to day. Like they're not beating up as much. They feel just a little bit more, I'm gonna say consistent outside of the gym. Like there's a little bit of muscle soreness or something like that, but nothing significant. There isn't any drastic changes within the program. So like my tissue, my elbows, my knees are talking to me, because sometimes that can happen. Sometimes a random knee can go, oh, hello there, I am here, you have loaded me. So yeah, I have found that. I have found like a longer block length with slightly less intensity, but a steady amount of volume to some extent for that athlete has worked better across more athletes.
There's one other thing I wanted to touch on, because you mentioned in prep for the presentation, we spoke about like communication and experiences of coaching that demographic. I will say my single favorite thing about anyone who's a master's, like just less childish, which seems like such an obvious thing to me. Less emotional outburst, less silly fuck around, less like, oh, we're not going to push this block. Okay. Oh, you don't want me to load that? I won't do it. And like, you don't have to deal with that shit. Like, I think there's a certain obvious maturity point in a coaching relationship where it's like the example, and again, she keeps coming up because of recently, it's been so funny, but Alexia pulled 195 for a lifetime PB and it moved really well. And I said, I'm going to check it. But I said to her, the composure that it took or something like that to not load 200. And she replied, Callum, I'm a grown up now, don't have time for that. And I was just like, if that's not poignant. Yeah.
But I do think as well that is built on rapport. That is built amongst the trust that she has within you. And I do but trust is built over a longer period of time. I think with a slightly, but when you have that trust and you, for whatever reason, don't betray that trust or whatever, you know what I mean? Like that is where, I don't know. I've got that with a few of my guys now, and I'm like, oh shit, I could say anything and they'll jump offset within a sensible nature, but I could say anything and they'll do it. Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. The maturity thing is like hit the nail on the head there. Alice, if you don't mind me asking, what did you mention about your athlete? I think it was the respect element, wasn't it?
Yeah, I definitely find I think you mentioned it in the presentation about the respect on our time and our other responsibilities, and knowing when best to ask like detailed questions and things like that. She's really good at asking quality questions, and she won't just like send them randomly like in the middle of a workout. So if she needs me mid-workout, she'll ask me a concise question, so she gets concise answer. And if she wants a detailed response, she's pretty aware of my schedule anyway. Most of my athletes are, but she really, really has the respect on like my time.
I do want to say as well, just that you've just said it there, is awareness, but not so much awareness of you, but awareness of their own ability. Now, again, I think this comes in with that they are more mature. They are very much aware of where they are in a process. They are very much aware of what we were asking them, and they won't make those silly like, oh, it's an RP8, I'm going to do an RP10. I'm like, you know what I mean? Like they're just very much aware of their own capabilities and abilities, which makes the process that much more enjoyable, because you're not going to, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get the stress of the immature, oh, there, it was an 8. Yeah, I decided to max out. And I'm just like, you don't get that. You don't get that.
Shall we wrap up? Oh, go on, Lucy, you go.
We've touched on quite a lot of like the physical programming and recovery aspects, but how do you find masters lifters cognitively are different to like younger athletes? I know we just touched on like their behavior, they tend to not overshoot as much. I've definitely found with my my masters lifter that positive and encouraging feedback is so important.
Mhm.
Like, she's there and she's training hard, probably harder than any of my other athletes. And it's for her, it's not to like show up on a platform and show off in front of people. It is all for her and her kind of sustainability and health and fitness. And she just wants to be strong. But how do you feel generally that mentally, what are the difference between master lifters and junior open lifters?
I think it comes down to the goal. Like, you've hit the nail on the head there. Like, a lot of junior lifters, sub junior lifters, immature or otherwise, like, I can't really say that they're all immature because they've got goals. Of course, they've got goals. It's all about their awareness. So the masters lifters, 9 times out of 10, know exactly what they want when they approach the process of being coached. I feed into that so long as it gives a positive feedback loop. Compared to a younger goodbye. Compared to someone who is a little bit younger, where you have to be just a little bit more affirmative with them. Like, you almost have to remind them of why they're in the process, because they can get a bit confused. Like, I've had someone recently, and we're building up to competition, and the idea of the competition was X, and then all of a sudden they're going, oh well, I want to get to nationals. I'm like, the fuck did that come from? do you get what I mean? So I don't know really how to answer the question specifically, apart from just going based off of what you said. They are very much aware as to what their goals and ambitions are, and we always feed back into that loop. And sometimes it's given the support as well, because as I said, it does take them longer to adapt to stimulus, movement mechanics, movement constraints, anything like that. It does take them a lot longer, and that's a generalized concept, but it's just reiterating like why we're doing it, what we are expecting to happen over a long period of time. And 9 times out of 10 they go, yeah, sure. Like, I got my athlete Andy, he, when he first started, he couldn't bench with an arch to save his life. 5 years down the line, he's finally got an arch. A little mini goal that he had, and he didn't care of the scope of time, but he's so damn excited the fact that, like, oh look, I didn't think that I could do this, but now I can create an arch properly. It just means the world to him. Like little things like that, and it's just feeding into that. Any others before I let everyone go? No.
That was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it was really good.
There was bits in there where I got lost a bit, but it is what it is.
No, it was good.
Thank you guys for listening. Hopefully you don't have nightmares of my voice now.
Thank
Right.
you.
Cheers, guys. Bye now.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.